Tena, intendaci. Let me teach you some Swahili now. Swahili we say habari. Habari. And then I will probably say Muzuri, which is good. I mean a word. So habari has to do with greetings of the morning. I hope you are going to continue to afternoon. But anyway, like you heard, my name is Flora Mutahi. I'm an entrepreneur. And I want to make a caveat before I begin. I'm not an economist, and I told Dr. Ali that I'm not going to be almost personally an economist. I'm going to talk from my practical point of view of beginning a brand when I had no, I basically was employed as an intern for nine months, and I went into employment. I went into business, and that is when I began. You can believe the first slide. So that's when I went into business with a dream. This is 28 years ago. Last 2 weeks ago, we just celebrated our 28th birthday. And I just wanted to do a dream, and I started and I began. So I'm going to give you my point of view, very, very pragmatic. But during my career, I was the chair of the Private Sector Alliance, which is the whole of the private sector, and also the chair of the Kenya Association of Manufacturing. So I am with a little bit in economics, but a lot of it I'm going to. So these are my brands. Next slide. Just so that I am for real. Those are my brands. That was when we were 25 years old. The president now 28 years ago old. So we are now national, regional, and we are going global.
This is our luxury collection. The next slide, which is orthodox tea. I don't know how many of you know that Kenya, as much as you have the best coffee, we can debate with you in Kenya. We say we have the best tea. So this is something this is our luxury collection. Next slide. Next slide. Those are the kind of how we present our brands. And the last slide about the brand. Next slide. We also do vending machines. What happened during COVID is people then started saying, we're in the offices, but we don't want our house, we don't want people, we're in the houses, we don't want our house helps. So we pivoted, and now we have fresh brew machines where you just press a button. We didn't need to queue over there, just press a button and the tea would come out. So that's a little bit about me. So next slide. I think I was asked to discuss, can Ethiopia become a manufacturing powerhouse? And I would actually like to end this and just say a resounding yes. Definitely it can. Because if we took a step back and actually situated Ethiopia, it's in Africa. What do we have in Africa? We have all the factors of production that are needed. We have arable land. We actually say we can be the food basket of the world. And we will be in years to come. Those guys will be coming here queuing because they don't have the land and the capacity, what we have. We have abundant natural resources, iron ore, cobalt. Some are not even found out yet. That is why we are seeing wars right here in Africa. We have a very young democratic population. It's just skill them, send them out, skill them, and we will need them. We actually can't even afford to keep sending people out to go and take their hard-earned energy abroad. We will need it right here on the capital. And of course, what this does, when you have all these numbers and you have all these opportunities, consumption, of course, and the more we are, of course, you can see Africa is urbanizing, so consumption is going to increase. I was last in Ethiopia 8 years ago. We came with the Association of Manufacturers, and I actually had the honor of being hosted by your Prime Minister. And I remember he gave us his policy, why Ethiopia is doing what Ethiopia does. And one of the things he said is he wants to be very strategic in the way he's going to open up Ethiopia. Of course, it's debatable. We are totally different. And he said, we've seen what you Kenyans are doing, and all these Chinese are in your country, and we've seen, and we said, we've also seen what you're doing. So today I'll sort of walk you through the journey we've taken and the journey you've taken, and I think there are lessons to be learned really from both of them. Next slide. So Kenya has really made significant strides. Of course, we understand the importance of manufacturing. And I'm not going to begin in the 60s because I wasn't born. I'm going to begin in the 90s when I sort of went into business. And this is a time when we had significant reforms in the manufacturing sector. We began having an export-oriented industrialization plan. This is when we sort of crafted our EPZs. We developed an export compensation scheme. Didn't go too well. There was a little bit of scheming around that. And we devalued the shilling. This was in the 90s when I was beginning business. We also did a lot of promotion of local investments. The government literally went out and really started trying to attract FDI, and we also attracted a lot of development financial institutions. I think there's a lady today who was speaking about financing and collateral. Well, what these development institutions do is they come in, and that's actually how I started my business, is I didn't have money, remember, I had no plan. My parents were not impressed. They thought a girl gets an education, gets married and gets children, and I said, no, I'm going to get an education and I will start my business and I'll do the rest. And so I had no capital. But I found a development fund, actually it was a UN-backed something, that actually said, if you have so much capital, we will give you, we will match it. So I went back home and I told my parents, give me money, and they were like, of course not, we wanted you to work. So what I did is I then eventually, I wore down my mother in a bit, and she put in just a little bit, and they matched it. And she kept on putting, and she would put it in her name, which give her the security. This would not have happened if we didn't have these development partners in the country. And of course, the other thing we did as Kenya is we did a lot of trade liberalization. We removed import quotas and licensing. When I was in school, I studied in the UK, we literally used to have to go to the central bank and beg for a foreign exchange, and it used to get to school, maybe on time, maybe not. But we liberalized all that. By the time I started my business, you could import, you could do what we can. So we removed all those quotas and we reduced a lot of barriers to trading. So if I could go to the next slide. So in the early 2000s, so we pushed on these reforms, and in the early 2000s, the government came out with what they called the Vision 2030 roadmap. Now, the beauty about having these kind of roadmaps is you put your country on a map and you look at every single sector. Manufacturing, of course, was very, very important, but this also gives a lot of confidence for FDIs, because remember, they're sitting in Europe or Asia or somewhere, and it's a map to them. So they're saying, what's happening in Ethiopia? What's happening in Ghana? What's happening in Kenya? So when you have a roadmap like this and you tell them we are committing 2030, this is what we are going to do, it becomes a blueprint that they come into your country and say, fine, where is the EPZ? Where are the SEZs? Where is this? Where is that? You said you're going to increase skills. Do you have that? And etc. The beauty about also a roadmap is when they want to support you, they know where to support you. I mean, we've had a lot of support from a lot of governments coming to say, you've committed to capacity build, we are going to do that. You've committed to land reforms, we're going to help you. You've committed to X, Y, and Z. So that is the beauty about having a very clear roadmap. The other thing we did is we made significant improvements in the business environment. And here we did exams, how people do exams. What is the mark sheet? And they tell you this is the mark sheet, and we said, fine, we're going to deal with those issues. So, we dealt with streamlining regulations, reducing bureaucratic hurdles, simplifying business processes, investing in infrastructure. We upgraded a lot of our transport networks. Power generation, we were moving towards 5,000 megawatts, because we knew we needed this for our vision. And basically we dealt with a lot of our infrastructure. And like I said, because we had a roadmap, we got a lot of support from other organizations. If you could go to the next slide. Between 2017 and 2022, this is Kenyatta's government. He was very clear around the Big Four agenda. Again, it was a policy that we put out there, and we concentrated on health, manufacturing, affordable housing, and universal health care. And let me just mention, affordable housing was sort of linking with manufacturing, because what they did is we created also policies like a local content policy that actually said any government expenditure will have to have 40% local content. So we started receiving the government tenders. You were actually able as private sector to sort of work with the government in this. And in the affordable housing, our minister tells of a beautiful story of getting the informal sector. He told them, go organize yourselves, come back, and what can you offer the affordable, the government was getting involved in the affordable housing, but what can you offer? And what they did is they actually went and formed a company. They got a proper lawyer, formed a company, and these I'm talking street vendors, formed a company and said, we're going to do the windows and the doors. which was a huge part. Any developer here will know it's a big part of a contract, and the government gave them that, and they went and organized themselves. They standardized. We took them to the standards body. They standardized these doors. They put them up. They tested them, and when they finally got the tender, then they broke it up between them. What was interesting I think they were creating, I think it was 2,000 houses. They then came back and told the government, we want to buy the houses now. We have the money. So it is a beautiful story when you sort of put your money in manufacturing, and because of the downlines that it created. It has created jobs, it improved their standards. On top of that, it put money in their pockets, and now they've become consumers. Our current government right now has what he's calling a bottom-up economic transformation program, where he's transforming agriculture. We are trying to mechanize as much as possible, and we're trying to do value addition. I do tea. One of my biggest pain points when I got into tea was 95% of our tea is exported in bulk as a country. We've pushed that number. Right now, I think we are exporting 91% in bulk. But this is not a Kenyan problem. This is an African problem. A lot of Africans, we have not moved up the value chain. We've not invested in the chains, and we've not moved up. I personally think it was set up like that previously. A lot of colonization, go grow us tea, send it to us, soda ash, send it to us. But it is time we became selfish and actually moved up the value chain. And this is where now governments need to almost say, and I know Sri Lanka did this, where they actually said in another 8 years, we are not going to allow exports of their tea in bulk. And what they did is every 2 years, they would actually reduce that quota. Today, Sri Lanka exports only 40% in bulk and 60% in value addition. So it just shows you when a government comes behind the private sector and they work together on our own natural resources, we leave the value on the continent. And that is what we in the country. And that's what we really, really need to do as Africa. Next slide. So another area we did, of course, is we opened up and we went for regional integration. I remember our then president, Mwai Kibaki, who is then passed on, was very, very adamant about the East African community. It's something they had tried when we got our independence in '63. It hadn't quite worked, and he said, it is going to work. And it was difficult. It was difficult when we got the East. First, we started Uganda and Tanzania. When we sat them in a room and said, we want this integration, they said, no. Kenya is too advanced in their manufacturing. You're going to overrule us. So we gave them what we call asymmetry. Asymmetry means you come in slowly. So we don't give you market access immediately. We give you, we open up. Every 2 years, we continue dropping the quota until we have a proper market access. So currently, Kenya, we actively participate in regional trade agreements like COMESA, of course, the East African community, which has grown over time. And of course, now we've picked up preferential trade agreements like AGOA, giving us access to the markets. It's not been easy. It's a journey. It's not. It's a journey, and you need to take it slowly and carefully. But it is good. The next slide. So what have been the results of that? Currently, we export $6.8 billion. 2.9 of those billions we export to all African countries. Out of this, 1.8 is to the EAC. So the East African community opening up helped us. So because remember, as a manufacturer, how do you drive down your cost of economies of scale? You need markets. So our market was about maybe 40 million at the time. I think we are 54 right now. So we needed bigger markets. We moved to, I think it's 180. I think now we talk about COMESA is 600, and after is 1.2 billion. We need those markets. And yes, there's a debate around, do we open, do we close? But let me give you an interesting study. When we started, of course, remember Uganda, we gave them asymmetry. So they opened up slowly. They are now exporting, I think for the first time, there's a month last year, they exported more into Kenya than we took to them. But have we degrown? No. When I'll show you a slide about our output as Kenya has never gone down. What happens when somebody else sort of takes that market, you go bigger. And that is why you saw Kenyatta our president was very, very clear about pushing the AfTA. So fine, we've got an East Africa, let's go to COMESA, let's move to ASCFTA. When we are all selling to each other, we will then continue to go outside. Next slide. So if you look on the right-hand side of this slide, It actually, next slide. And I know I put you a marathon, we're Kenya's at the winners marathoners. We tag team with you guys, huh? You take it sometimes, we take it sometimes. Next slide, please. So if you look on that, intra-Asia trade, Asia trading with Asia is 59%. EU trading with EU is 69%. Look on the left. Let's start down here. Intra-Africa trade, 14.4. That's how much we trade with each other. It's unfortunate. COMESA, 14. East African, 18. So there is a story to be told around common markets. I think it can only help you. Next slide. The after for me is the biggest opportunity I have seen for African businesses. Even for my brand, I've stopped actually so much trying to do the Europes and the whatever. I'm saying Africa is calling. The numbers are huge. 1.2 billion, turnover of 3.9 billion, and it will help us really expand. Next slide. Demographic, these are 1.3, 40% youth, 34% is middle class. That is huge. Those are consumers who need your goods. 3.1 trillion GDP expected to grow to 29. The working age, I think we know, is about 19, which is typical. And these are the areas that we're going to need to make investments: education, health, women's rights, and digitization. If we go to the next slide, human capital development. I watched this grow over time. When I was starting my brand, when I needed a tea taster, because tea is like coffee, it's something you learn, it's a skill. There was actually no school. There was nowhere I could get something, so I'd had to poach from my competition. Remember, I'm young, I'm just starting. I can't afford it. So do you know what I did? I'm digressing a little bit. I went to the largest company and I said, I want to learn how to make tea. And he said, listen, we are growers. It doesn't matter. But don't say who you are, because you're packing. They actually thought me, a young child, I was young, I could actually take them on. So I went in and I put in a coat and I said, I'm an intern. And they taught me how to trade. I did 100 tea tasting, 100 cups a day for 3 weeks. And that's how I learned how to taste tea. My point is, skills, learning, we need to have them in the country if we are going to actually be serious on manufacturing. So skills development. Our government was very, very serious around the TVET education. We reinvested back in them, and I think we got a lot of support from GIZ, who I know are here. And actually, when I was chair of the Manufacturing Association, we did a program where we linked industry and academia. So what we'll do is when we get the interns, we'll take them into industry, and once they sort of work there for a month, we come in and say, what do they know? And the first thing they said, these people are not industry ready. So we started trying to build programs on how to make them industry ready. It's a battle. We continue to fight up to now because, academia, if there are academicians in the room, they take very long to change their curriculum. But definitely we have made a big improvement. So expanding that was a big thing, enhancing university programs, farm level capacity building. I've had several grants, a lot of them UN driven, where they've actually said, listen, we'll give you somebody. Actually, my ISO certification was actually paid by a grant. I would never have had the money to grow, to do it, but I needed ISO if I wanted to grow and if I wanted to export. So there's a lot of capacity development that can be given. If we go to the next slide, 60% of Kenyan manufacturing firms are SMEs, and I believe Ethiopia, I heard the number could be slightly bigger, right? But it's definitely an African issue. A lot of our businesses in Africa are SMEs. So we need to put a lot of capacity and attention into them. Because again, with the kind of population growth we are having, I think I saw you guys 2 million going into the job market. For us, it's 1 million. These people are not going to find jobs. So we need to train them to be entrepreneurs, and strong entrepreneurs at that. So we need to put in, there's a program that I ran when we were at the Association of Manufacturing I think it was a linkage program, where you had the larger organizations and said, what skill here can you give, or what part of your business can you give to an SME? We grow them, we upskill them, and we give it to them. And I remember there were several companies. One was the motor industry. One of them gave all their seats to an SME, helped them build capacity, helped them get certification. There was somebody else they were doing cabling. They gave all their wiring and their electronic wiring to SMEs. And this is, Something that we continue to do every year. We go out into industry and we ask, please, can you, what part of your skill could you give us? And then capacity building, access to finance. I keep saying SMEs suffer from access to anything and everything. Whether you don't have access to knowledge sometimes because you don't know where to look. Thank God for internet now and GPT, but there's a lot of access information you don't have. Access to finance, access to staff, access to almost anything, access to markets. SMEs don't know where to market. So the more you can help them formalize and give them a lot of these opportunities, this is how we are going to grow this. So our government has really been very keen to do that. Right now, the president has what he's calling a hustler fund. He's put together a micro fund, which we're doing on our digital, through Safaricom, which I think you guys know, where I can actually borrow money. And the case study is given of a woman who borrows money in the morning as she's going to the market at 4 a.m. She buys her vegetables, goes to the market, sells, comes back same day and pays. Her interest rate is 0 point something because it doesn't cost much. Whereas before, in all the sort of markets, we used to have a Shylock at the corner over there who used to charge them something like 10% for borrowing for those few hours. So I think when you start getting innovative ways to give money and making it affordable, these are things that would really, really help. Next slide, if we went into public-private dialogue. Private sector in Kenya has been really encouraged, and this was especially through Kibaki's time, our previous president. He said, listen, I want to speak to one person in private sector. Can't speak to everybody. So we organized ourselves into, well, it didn't succeed into one, but into one large organization, which is the one I said I chaired, which is Kenya Private Sector Alliance. And under that, we had several associations. And what we also did, so what this does is we used to have presidential roundtables. So every quarter, we would sit with the president, with his ministers, and the things that they're unable to unlock, we would be able to say we are not being able to get our standards out correctly, we're having a problem in logistics, infrastructure, and the president would listen. And of course, you can imagine if you're a minister, and our minister has left, if you're a minister, you don't want private sector reporting you. So when we go to the office and say we want to meet because the presidential roundtable is coming up, we would sort out a lot of our issues. But of course, the sticky issues that need big policy development, it was an opportunity for us to speak directly to the presidents and tell them why we think we need to have that. We then moved that to ministerial roundtables. We still have it up to now. We meet the parliament and the Senate because that's where the regulations are met. We have gubernatorial roundtables with our governors in every single county. Remember, we devolved into 47 different counties. So now I think I noticed you have something similar. It is a complex system, but because we're able to sit with private sector, and we do this at least 4 times in a year with each of these, and we also have a judiciary roundtable. So we sit with the judiciary and we give them our experiences of our cases and things that are really not happening. And so we've had some key success factors. So we have these 3 bodies. We have the KEPSA, which is the Association of Associations, Kenya National Chamber, that one is more for the SMEs, and then Kenya Association of Manufacturers is the KAM. And just because they helped me prepare some of my slides, the next slide, let me just at least explain to you. Association of Manufacturers, next slide. This one I'll fly through. Basically has 1,300 manufacturers in one organization, organized into 14 sectors in 7 counties. Next slide. This is our membership distribution. You can see majorities, of course, in Nairobi, and those are the sectors that we have. Next slide. And these are the focus areas for this period. Global competitiveness, because if you're not globally competitive, where am I going to sell my goods? If I want to sell my tea to the US under the AGOA, I can't sell if I'm not globally competitive. We're doing export-led growth. We follow the government. We travel with the president. We go out there and say, this is the market we want. This is what we want to achieve. SME development, I think I've spoken a lot about that. But the local content bill, that one has really, really helped SMEs. Every single parastatal in Kenya, there's a law that they have to buy 40% of anything they buy has got to be made in Kenya. And the other one we have is AGPO, which is for women and youth. Again, 30% of all government procurement needs to be given to women and youth with a 15% variation. So if I want to sell my tea and somebody else is selling their tea, I'm a lady, I'm a youth, I'm allowed a 15% variation. What's the idea of this? This is the idea is to give the SMEs and local products, local companies, an opportunity to really do business with government, and government are the ones who do the largest business. And then, of course, agriculture for industry. This is our president's pet project, but of course prioritizing food security, bringing down cost of farmer inputs, technical services, and agricultural productivity is another area. Next slide. Again, I've put, we are still winning. So local manufacturers, again, one of the wins we've had is when the government was doing our SGR, which is the train, a rail all the way from Mombasa to Nairobi, 500 kilometers. We were actually, I think we missed the first round, but in the second round when we were tendering, private sector were able to tender. So this is what those local content policies actually help us. Government has been intentional on the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. Right now, all our uniforms, furniture, anything that can be bought in Kenya is being bought in Kenya. So that has started to spur our textile industries for domestic as well. As much as we are looking at the AGOA situation, what are we doing? Because remember, we are importing. And this import bill, we're trying to, right now in Kenya, bring down our import bill. So there's a lot of export substitution going on, where the government is saying furniture can be made in Kenya. Doors and windows now can be made in Kenya. So these are things that your own local consumption can drive manufacturing. So we do roadshows, like I said, going out with the presidents. And another area we do is we combat illicit trade, because illicit trade can bring down manufacturing, whether it is substandard goods, whether it's dumping, counterfeit, undeclared. All these are really, really important. So there's been a big, big drive and push by the government to actually make sure that manufacturing have an opportunity. Next slide is access to capital. Finance, I think we said and we saw, is the backbone to manufacturing because of the capex. It's very easy to trade, and that's why nations begin with trading. But when you really, really want to do manufacturing, you have to have access to finance. So liberal markets, forex markets, repatriation of profits, and financial markets, having access and having the development partners also to support and bolster. Right now, there's a program in Kenya where Africa Guarantee Fund is actually guaranteeing 75% collateral for SMEs. So as SME, as long as I have 25%, 75% will be guaranteed by them. They channel it through the banks, so the banks are not that friendly. Sometimes you hear it drops to 50, but if you push or you know your rights, you can try and get as much of that as possible. These are the things that actually help, because what they're doing is they're helping the financial sector de-risk. I know Afri-Exim Bank is really strong on the continent right now. They're saying they're here for Africa, and Africa needs to speak to them. Next slide. So entrepreneurship and innovation, business incubation, this is really, really important, like I mentioned, for the SMEs to actually make sure that they grow. Again, you can get a lot of support when you have a clear roadmap. Technology transfer, automation, digitization. We put in a huge fiber cable. I think you guys did as well. Or anyway, maybe that's why we're working together. Product innovation and development. These are areas that we are constantly making sure that we build. Next slide. Have we had challenges? Of course. Have there been many? Of course. From infrastructure deficits. We got power, but it was not stable power. Transport networks, they are there, but our population is growing a little faster. Other infrastructure issues and challenges that we have, congested ports, turnaround times, high cost of doing business. As much as we still believe we're very competitive, Africa already, just by our location and the fact that we haven't structured ourselves, I think we did a quick calculation and said we are 12% more expensive than other countries in the world, and this is why we need to continue to invest in manufacturing. Skills gap, despite the project, skills are moving very, very quickly. We are now at AI, we are now at robotics, yet we are still trying to do technical colleges. So it's a big thing. Competition, we face competition and we'll continue to face competition from the global, from the first world and also from other African countries. Of course, we have the issue of servicing our own debt. Unpredictable environments. It's not particularly easy to be like Europe and Asia's, but it took them a long time to get where they are. So we are going to continue and slow uptake of regional markets. Not everybody picks up regional markets. So the next slide will actually show you what I was saying. If you look, we can act from 2017, the value of our output, you can see, continues to grow. Intermediate consumption, this is what we import to produce, continues to grow. And our value added has unfortunately remained sort of stagnant. And that is where, for me, the value lies. The minute we continue and we become selfish about adding value on the continent, I believe is where we can move really with leaps and bounds. So as I was coming and preparing, as I'm sort of winding down, I spoke to a couple of CEOs and I said, I've been asked whether Ethiopia can be the next powerhouse. What do you think? And a couple of CEOs gave me their opinion. Typical to what Ali has said, it's definitely possible, but there are a lot of areas we need to deal with. And then one of them said, listen, why can't they tell them to look at the best in class? Would anybody want to guess who's the best in class in Africa? They're small and they're powerful. Next slide. Ring a bell? Anybody know that flag? Guys, we need to travel Africa a bit more. That's Mauritius. We need to know our continent a little bit more. So what did Mauritius do? Strategic diversification. They moved from the dependence of sugar production. Those people who remember in the 90s, Mauritius was known for sugar, and I think it was vanilla. And they actively promoted investments in diverse sectors like textiles, seafood processing, jewelry, light engineering. And this the diversification, I think the other gentleman in the morning spoke about it, is very, very important because it sort of hedges your risk, especially when you had things like COVID come about. The people who were more diversified, of course, did a lot better. Then there was a favorable business environment. They established a stable policy and economic development. They attracted foreign investment through tax incentives, free port zones, streamlined bureaucracy, and the government prioritized education, training, building of a skills workforce. And the biggest one, I think, when the CEO I was talking to talked about was predictability of legislation and regulation. Because remember, they sit out from the North America or the Chinas or somewhere and they say, let's go into Africa. Then they start saying, where do I have predictability? So do I have a roadmap? But then when I put my investment, is it safe? Can I take it out? If we disagree, where do I go to the courts? So regulation and legislation is a really, really important one. So regional integration, they strategically position themselves within regional blocks like COMESA, SADC, gaining access to larger markets and preferential trade agreements. Additionally, in actively participating in the AGOA and gaining access to the US market. I think this was a big one, definitely for them, and I do know they are playing in the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So focus in innovation, I think we know that. They prioritized quality production and they encouraged innovation within its manufacturing sector. This resulted in higher value-added products and a reputation for reliability, attracting premium brands and buyers. I think that one we know, and the last one is, not the last, these are the main ones, infrastructure development. They invested heavily in infrastructure, including ports, airports, and road networks, and I think the gentleman in the morning spoke about it. They facilitated efficient logistics and trade. And this infrastructure attracted foreign investors seeking a reliable and efficient operating environment, because I keep telling you, they don't owe us anything. They want to come, they want to put in their money, and they want to know it is safe. I'll quickly turn it around, and I'll be able to move my goods. Let's go to the next slide. So they stood out as a manufacturing leader, and here are some key comparisons. Their manufacturing share of the GDP in Mauritius is 13.8, and in Kenya is approximately 11. The rest of Africa is 10. I didn't have Ethiopia numbers, but I think I told you guys I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't even know where to look for them. Export performance, Mauritius is at 60% of their total exports go out. Kenya is 15, the rest of Africa is about 20. So we are also lagging a little bit behind. Employment, Mauritius is at 22, formal employment, Kenya is at 17, and the rest of Africa is about 12. So maybe Ali can speak to this slide when he later comes on. Next slide. So challenges. in Mauritius, despite what I'm trying to show you is we can all have a beautiful story, but we all have challenges, but we have to sort of push our way through and make sure. So they had rising cost of labor. As you build an economy, the people get richer, they become more consumerism, they want to be paid more, and all of a sudden you had a competitive advantage of cheap labor, and now all of a sudden you don't. So it's something that one needs to keep in mind. And of course, the way around this is automation, technology, adaptation is also crucial to actually keep this going. Skills gap, they still needed more skilled labor because, again, it is moving faster, the AI, the robotics, the technology. Competition, they faced a lot of competition from other African countries, especially those with lower labor costs. E.g., I think I remember Ethiopia has come up in a lot of our conversations around labor costs. Continuous innovation and differentiation is essential to remain competitive. So how quickly can they remain? It's like I said, it's a marathon. It's a game. You've got to keep your foot on the pedal and keep moving because every single facet is moving quickly. So they also had a market access. Remember, internally they're a very small market, so that's why a lot of them they have to sort of export. So they were also very heavily concentrated on few markets, making them vulnerable to external shocks. And this is when you saw they started changing and saying, let's diversify and see what we could do. And I think financial services has been one of their big wins, where they've been quite good on their financial services. Infrastructure and logistics, they had limited access to reliable and affordable power. Energy shortages were high, which increases cost of doing business. Then there was also high cost of doing business, administrative procedures. Again, these are areas they needed to move. So Mauritius manufacturing journey serves as a valuable model for us to model as African countries. As much as we've looked at Kenya, you guys have looked at Ethiopia. I've just given you a small snippet of Mauritius. And all you do is address the challenges and continue to press on. So I think, as I conclude, last slide, by addressing these challenges, and I don't think I need to go through them, policies, conducive environment, infrastructure, access, support, promote, and moving up the value chain. You can see I'm very passionate about that one. Human capital, access to finance. These are the things that we really need to work on and make sure that we can become the powerhouse that we want to be. So with those few remarks, that is my presentation. Thank you.